agreement that they say will see both countries working together more closely on a range of issues including trade, investment and technology. The so-called Atlantic Declaration follows talks between Rishi Sunak and President Biden at the White House. Speaking at a news conference a short time ago, President Biden said both countries were leading together on global issues.
We have had important and positive discussions to deepen our bilateral economic relationship and expand our cooperation to shape the challenges of the future for the remainder of this century. It's a testament to the depth, breadth, and I would argue the intensity of our cooperation and coordination, which has existed, continues to exist between the United Kingdom and the United States.
The mayor of the French town where 4 preschool children, including a British national, were stabbed, has said they appear to be in a stable condition. Surgeons are treating an adult who was also injured in the attack in Annecy in the French Alps. Police have arrested a Syrian man who has refugee status in Sweden. Health officials have upgraded the heat warning for parts of England this weekend from yellow to amber, meaning high temperatures could affect people of all ages and impact the NHS. The alert, which comes into force tomorrow morning, applies to eastern and southern England and the Midlands. Police have identified human remains found in a field in Nottinghamshire earlier this year as a man who had been missing since 1967. Alfred Swinsville, who was 54, is believed to have been killed and buried on farmland. His family said they felt relief but also sadness. The organisers of the Glastonbury Festival have asked fans not to bring disposable vapes to this year's event. The e-cigarettes have been added to its official Do Not Bring list, which also includes gazebos and knives. BBC News.
In half an hour, Evan Davis will be back with a new series of The Bottom Line. Tonight's topic, food price inflation. Evan and his guests will be tackling claims that food prices might be higher than they need to be and that customers are being ripped off. That's The Bottom Line at 8:30. First on Radio 4, here's Joshua Rosenberg with Law in Action.
Hello. On this week's programme, we talk to the Parole Board. You may have watched its members on Parole, the recent BBC television series discussing whether it was safe to release a prisoner.
This was a man, who has exploited lots of people. However, I think perhaps he is motivated this time to try and not offend further. Okay, I'm less convinced. Yes, I knew you would say that. I think he's created a very good narrative, and we know that he is a seasoned con man. He spent his life creating plausible stories and conning people.
What you won't have seen on the television series are the most senior members of the Parole Board. They've been telling me how they judge public safety. Also this week, the husbands who take their families abroad so they can leave their wives stranded and alone. And how will the law deal with artificial intelligence? This was the second most seen vote in England and Wales, speaking in the spring.
The question that would have come into all your minds in connection with AI is, of course, when, if ever, judicial decisions are likely to be taken by machines rather than judges.
Stay tuned for the answer. First, though, parole. The word comes from the French and it means speech or word. In English, it was used for prisoners who gave their word that they wouldn't commit any more crimes if they were released. These days, that's not enough. Last year, the government proposed new powers that could allow ministers to delay the release of dangerous offenders. This was Dominic Raab, who was Justice Secretary at the time, telling MPs why he thought the reforms were needed.
Mr. Speaker, the role of the Parole Board in deciding on the appropriateness of release from prison for criminal offenders, including many convicted of very serious violent and sexual offences, is clearly of paramount importance to protecting the public, but also maintaining and sustaining public confidence in our justice system. It is the first duty of government to protect the public.
Dominic Raab was particularly concerned about a case more than 5 years ago, when the Parole Board would have released the notorious sex offender John Warboys if the courts hadn't intervened.
The Parole Board's decision in January 2018 to release him on licence caused deep concern amongst his victims and the wider public. It was subject to a successful legal challenge, after which the CPS successfully prosecuted all boys for the attacks on 4 further women.
Dominic Raab resigned from the government in April, but his Victims and Prisoners Bill was given a second reading by MPs last month, and it will shortly begin its council stage. A few days before the Commons debate, Caroline Corby, as chair of the parole board, was asked about the bill by MPs on the Justice Committee. One of its clauses would allow a government minister to insist that a parole board panel, perhaps dealing with a particularly serious case, should include a retired policeman. What did Caroline Corby think of that?
I do think this could be seen to be encroaching on the independence of the parole board, and in some ways the exception is that it's trying to seek to influence the outcome of our decisions.
I went to see Caroline Corby and her vice chair, Peter Rook, a former Old Bailey judge, at their offices in London. They explained what they do and what they can't do. We began with open-ended sentences, where the prisoner has already served the minimum term.
What the parole board does is, in the most serious and complex cases, it decides whether somebody who has an indeterminate sentence can be released back into the community or not, whether their risk can be managed in the community or not, once they've served their period of punishment. Now, over 90% of prisoners are released automatically, usually at the halfway stage of their sentence. So it's only 10% of prisoners who go through the parole process, but they are the most serious and complex. Nobody is referred to the parole board for consideration for release until they have served their period of punishment in prison. So it's not a mechanism for early release. The parole board will direct release if it is satisfied that it is no longer necessary for the protection of the public that the prisoner should be confined. So that's the test that our members use.
Ultimately, your responsibility is to try to predict whether an offender is going to re-offend and, as you say, commit a serious offence in the future. And that's the challenge of the parole board, isn't it?
Public protection is always our number one concern. But what we're looking at is not whether they've been sufficiently punished. That is not lawful. The punishment has been set by the sentencing judge. So our role, it's narrow, but it's very important, and it's to conduct a risk assessment. Do we think this prisoner can be safely managed in the community or not?
Peter, how difficult is that when you're sitting there? You've got to predict what somebody's going to do when they're let out of prison.
Absolutely, it's extremely difficult, but we do have the various reports to help us, and of course, the way the statutory test is framed, if there's doubt, we won't release.
When they're released, they're not just set free and free to do whatever they like.
Absolutely not. The community offender officer will put together a risk management plan. There'll be reporting conditions. There'll be various conditions preventing the prisoner from doing certain things, maybe in relation to the internet or their mobile phone.
Very awesome.
And so there'll be severe restrictions